Welcome to Life Behind Bars, produced and created by 50mm Media.
Welcome to Life Behind Bars, and on today's show, episode 4, we're talking about prison sentences. Who would like to begin?
Do you want to begin? Do you want me to begin?
I don't mind. I think I'm the wrong person to begin. I've done mine.
I can honestly say in my experience, I've never seen such a complicated system in all my life. Prison sentences are highly complicated.
Oh, I thought you meant the introduction for a second.
No, I mean, you are.
Sorry, we'll get back. Prison sentences. Yeah,
sentences are really, really complex. They are. I mean, there's non-custodial sentences. We may talk about that. Then there's your prison sentences, and then there's after. Because when you come out of jail, your sentence hasn't finished just because you come out of jail. It doesn't work like that. It's called being on license, of course, all part of that process. But over my lifetime, I've seen so many changes to the prison sentence, the way they're structured. Governments build the sentence structure. It's done by Parliament. They create what the sentence should be and hand down that set of sentences that are available to judges. And there are limitations within that set of sentences that judges have to apply and comply with. So there'll be a range of times from a minimum term to a maximum term that they can apply depending on the offence that's been committed. And I do know on social media, because I see it like everybody else does, many people think that sentences should be far, far longer, and they blame judges for not applying those stricter rules and being too soft and woke and all those things. They're caught by the legislation they're given by governments.
So
it's not just about length and term either, is it? It's about conditions that can be applied to sentences.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let me just make sure I've got that right. I'm pretty sure I have. And we actually spoke a little bit in episode 3 about what decisions politicians make and the civil servants that sit underneath them, and the people that work for the prison service, the MOJ, but outside of the prison effectively. So what happens is that the guys that work for the MOJ, they live outside the prison walls, effectively civil servants, MPs and such, they make the decisions around the prison sentences, i.e. if you commit burglary, you'll get a range, yeah. So 12 months through to 5 years, or whatever it might be. And then that is basically passed to the judge. That's in law, I assume?
They're limited to do.
And then that gets passed to a judge, so therefore the judge can only pass it based on a range, and they will then conduct that range, I guess, depending on the circumstances, the impact, everything evolved around it.
Judges are limited to young offenders cannot be given a whole life tariff on a life sentence.
When did that change? Because wasn't there a point in time when...
It's always been like that. It used to be called Her Majesty's Pleasure.
Yeah, but wasn't it a time where judges could just go, right, you, burglary, 10 years. You, burglary,
No, there's a bit of an illusion about sentences there, because if you go back long before I joined the service, prisoners never spent as long in prison as you imagine they did. Because a lot of people think, let's go back to the 40s and 50s, because that's giving them a sentence and they do the bird. They were literally conditioned to a quarter to 3 quarters. So a prisoner, if you were well behaved, let's say you got 12 months, if you were really well behaved and you were right first offender and all that, they could be let out after a quarter of their sentence. So perhaps 3 to 4 months, off you go. Others might be kept for 5 to 6 months, and then others may be kept right up to the 3/4 level because they've got big sentences, they're a lot of trouble in prison, not conforming. They would do, and the last 3 months they were on probation. They must always be left with that outside supervision bit. So this idea that prison sentences somehow are really short today and just not in jail is not true. They serve longer today. They're on average serving half their sentence in a prison, where before they could get out after a quarter of it.
I think it's more about the conditions when you go back to 40s and 50s, or certainly the people I speak to. Funny enough, I was in Shrewsbury Prison on Friday night doing a Night Behind Bars event. I actually ran a tour. So the first prison tour I've run in a long, long time. I was running a tour and I was talking about VP prisoners. So I was talking about sex offenders and everything that comes around VP prisoners. And I said that if you put the VP prisoners in with the general population, then they're going to get seriously hurt. And somebody went, good. And we had this kind of back and forth a little bit throughout the tour. And actually they were this was a person that was like death penalty, treat them harsh, lock them up, throw away the key. And I think the difference between the 40s and the 50s and now, there is obviously a difference in the prison sentence, but the conditions that prisoners were in was very, very different. I think when people sort of say we should go back to 40s and 50s, it's the same when they talk about kids. It's the conditions of it were much harsher.
Yeah, but they were measured with their outside society.
So there we go.
Remember,
Yeah,
the conditions
absolutely.
outside
We're a lot harsher.
We're harsher, even though the prisons would have been harsher than those
Yeah.
conditions. And in some ways, you might go, that's relatively similar today. We're just a reflection of society.
Absolutely. Graham, Officer G, we say this all the time, and it was one of the big things that you said to me when I very first met you, which was prisons are just a reflection of society.
To a degree.
Our own beliefs and cultures and standards and expectations have changed. Our
Yes.
own understanding
Yeah.
of people has
And
changed.
morality
So
has changed as
therefore,
well.
it changes across the board.
Yeah.
But let's go on to prison sentences, because there must have been a time.
Yeah,
where-
just, I'll pick up something I think is quite important. You know, when you talk about VPs and that guy said, good. And I said, I've had that said to me on tour, and I go, I understand why you say those things. Can you imagine the chaos that you would have up on a prison if you allowed that to happen? First of all, you're asking prisoners to be vigilantes. These people are already violent, that's why many of them are in jail, and you want to encourage them to be even more violent than they are. Doesn't matter how you justify who they're doing it to. And then you've got staff having to be involved in all that, and literally complicit in the crime that's being committed. I said, you'd have chaos in your prisons. You'd be like one of those third world prisons that you see down in South America.
You just lock them in,
Lock them
people
in.
on the outside, and there's no staff.
Let the prisoners take charge.
Just sit on the outside, on the walls with a gun like you did in
And put
episode 3 in
staff around the
Australia.
outside with guns and say, if you want that,
absolutely.
then I'll go with the government. Government's changed the law. I said, there'd be absolute chaos. I said, you'd never get anybody to ever work in a prison if you let that happen. Whether we like it or not, it's immaterial. The government decide that's what prisoners should have. They all come to prison under the equal prison sentence. Everybody is equal in the law when it comes to being in a prison. Prisoner is a prisoner is a prisoner. And that's the reality. So I have people say that to me, and I go, well, and I actually said to one gentleman, I said, tell you what, sir, we're short of prison officers. You're more than welcome to join the job, put the uniform on, and you can go into that cell and do what you like to that prisoner. And what I'll do in the meantime, I'll prepare the cell right next to him, because that's where you're going. Said, if you don't like the law, then you get it changed. That's the reality.
Yeah.
But don't make other people complicit in a crime to satisfy your personal feelings and anger.
What did he say?
Especially when they're emotional.
Well, he sort of insisted that we should go in there and give him a good kick and give him a hard time. And I go, what, for 38 years? I'm not coming to work with an angry head on every day. I don't want to come to work and always be, Yeah, I don't want to live that kind of life. I want to come in and do my job according to the rules that are given to me. And I just want to go home and just carry on with the rest of my life. That's what I want to do.
Yeah.
So, we're all very good at wanting other people to do things, the things we probably wouldn't do ourselves.
It's a very emotion-driven
Much of it's emotion-driven, it is, yeah, we understand that. But anyway, sorry to interrupt.
No,
but I just thought it was important.
Let's pick up very quickly on the different types of sentences. So you said, you've got a custodial sentence.
Yeah.
You've got you've got custodial. Then you've got, I guess, a license, because you can be given a custodial term, but then have that changed to
The suspended sentence.
yes, so it's a suspended sentence. So effectively, you're in prison, but not in prison. You're on license.
Yeah, you have a
effectively.
sentence.
Is that the right terminology?
Sorry.
So you can get like.
I'm giving you 12
So
months.
often do I say
in.
things and she just isn't listening to me. She's there like in
Basically,
my
they say,
side.
I'm giving you a prison sentence of 12 months, but
Yeah.
it's going to be suspended either for 12 months or 2 years.
2 years.
Yeah.
double.
But that means you're out technically on probation or license.
Yeah.
If you breach those license conditions, you don't have to commit another crime.
Go
You
to
can
jail.
be asked to serve that sentence.
Yeah.
It's meant to be a bit of a whole.
It's a deterrent.
And if you,
It's a-
do commit,
it's-
if you commit another crime,
Yeah.
then you can be sentenced for the new crime
And
plus serve the one.
Yeah, sometimes it can
It's
be
kind of like
consecutive.
like a last chance saloon, effectively.
Yeah.
It's a deterrent of prison
Yeah.
but without prison. So you've got those. We've got obviously remands, which is where people are in
That's
prison
sentence.
awaiting trial. So that's pre-sentence,
Well, yeah, that's the innocent until proven guilty
Yeah.
that they've been held on remand.
but you're still in prison, because I think it was. I don't think it happened at Shepton, but I know Shrewsbury. And there's a number. Obviously, there are remand prisons, but Shrewsbury was a remand, or had a remand section.
Well,
for
they're
a
called
while.
local prisons because you'll keep a small cohort of regular prisoners because they're running the kitchens and cleaners. That's about continuity. All the rest, we're looking to move them off into training prisons at some different level.
Yeah.
Because you've got to make space for the next load of remands coming through your door. Remember, we're servicing the courts. That's what many prisons do. If you think of Liverpool, it services the courts. It holds convicted prisoners to a degree,
Yeah.
but they've got to create space by moving people out so that they've got space for the next lot of courses.
Yeah, I think most local jails do. I know that Shrewsbury did, Gloucester did.
Yeah.
I think there's
Liverpool
Birmingham,
do it, Manchester do it, Leeds do it,
Bristol
London,
do
this is
it.
all-
Yeah. So you've always got
They all
that
do it.
section of kind of continuous churn,
I think there's-
which I guess is where when we talked about in episode 3, when we were talking about the what did we talk about in episode 3? When we were talking about roles, but we got into the conversation around like the psychology departments. And psychologists won't get involved, I would assume, with the remand prisoners because they're not going to be there long enough. They're not convicted yet, so therefore they're not in programs. Whereas healthcare will have to get involved with those people because they might have healthcare needs, but they won't go into necessary education. Because I think remand prisoners. So if we talk limitations is the wrong word, but we talk about sentences and what happens inside. Remand prisoners don't have to conform to the same rules as convicted prisoners.
Well, there's the same rules for what they call standards of behaviour. That applies
Yeah.
to all prisoners. What they have is different entitlements.
Okay, sorry.
Because they're innocent until proven guilty, technically they're not really required to work. Whereas convicted prisoners, as part of their prison sentence, is a requirement that you attend work or education.
Yeah.
So they can go, I don't want to go to work, I'm sitting in my cell, I've got a huge case coming up, I need to concentrate on that. And I've got,
because all my years of legal experience, I'm going to sit here and stuff.
or they're meeting with their legal
It's a little
teams on a
bit
much more
facetious, but
consistent
yeah.
basis because they've got legal things to deal with. Then you've got another kind of remand, and that's called a convicted remand prisoner. They're convicted, where the judge puts them back in prison until they decide whether or not they're going to serve a prison sentence. So you technically got remand, innocent until proven guilty, till the trial finishes. Then you've got convicted remand.
So you've been found guilty, but your sentencing might be 3 weeks' time or 3 months' time.
And remember,
whatever it
judges
might
may
be.
put that off for reports very often.
Yeah.
So that will be psychology that will come in and have to do a report.
We heard about the challenges out in episode 3. You're going to be waiting for everyone else to send you a report so you can do
so
your
they might say, we want a report on it. It might be a psychiatrist, whatever. And they will make that decision based on that report and other reports that come in from probation staff, outside agents, stuff like that. And then you've got the convicted prisoner. But it's not as simple as just, not everybody comes to prison for a criminal offence. There is such a thing as a civil offence, and you can have what they call civil prisoners. And they have entitlements that are similar to remands, because they're not technically criminals in that sense. It's weird.
Civil offences would be things like parking offences, non-payment of TV licences.
You don't come to prison for parking offences. You come to prison on a TV licence for not paying the TV licence. You come to prison for not paying the fine.
Okay.
So what you do is the prison is in default to the fine. It's slightly different, and technically you're still a civil prisoner, believe it or not.
I was going to say that's a civil offence.
Because the fine was your
The £1,000
sentence.
fine.
If
you
the
don't
fine
pay
was
the
what
fine,
you're supposed to do.
then I'm going to send you to prison in
12
default.
days, or whatever it is, yeah.
And then sometimes people stand up and say, I got the money, I got £1,000, Your Honour. Or a worship, if it's going to be a magistrate's court, I got the money, I can't pay that. Okay, then directly to prison now, and you might spend a couple of weeks there. But if you're serving, I don't know how they work it out now, but there's what they call part paid fines.
Yeah.
If you get a fine by a judge and refuse to pay it, they'll then oppose a sentence in default, and they'll tell you that at the beginning. I'm going to fine you £2,000. In default of not paying any or all of that fine, I will send you to prison to pay that fine off. And it will be calculated at a daily rate. So if you've got, let's say, 21 days...
Oh, we're going to
in
value
default,
people's time. This is like going to employment. We're valuing
if you've
people's
got
time.
21 days and they go, okay, then you're going to prison. And let's say you serve 10 days, that will then take that 2,000, technically, and I'm just chopping
like
figures in here,
£100
it'll bring it down about £100 a day, whatever.
Yeah.
And then you decide you want to be released. What you can do is pay the difference off and get released. Either you've got
So
the
do
money,
like 10 days and they go, I've had enough, here's a grand, I'm out, I'm done.
And what they do is, and then the admin staff who does what they call will calculate what you owe. If that money comes in the daytime, it has to come physically to the door, by the way. They might have changed it, but I believe it comes physically to the door by a member of family. It will be taken, it will be counted, it will go in, and then that prisoner will be fetched out, gone to reception. Now we've got the fine, everything's correct, and it'll all do, all paid, then release the prisoner. And some do, they go, and many don't.
Do you know that? Do you know what? Sometimes, like, I learned, 7 years I've been doing this, and I've learned so much. Every day's a school day, as they say, but and I don't mean to make light of it, because it's a serious situation, but I'll tell you what, there's a TV show in there somewhere. Without a doubt, there is a TV. There is a TV show in there somewhere where people get put in prison for a period of time, but you can pay yourself to get out when you've had enough.
When you think about it in
I'm
law,
a prisoner. Let me out.
when you think about it in law, it's a way of making retribution for the £1,000 that you don't have or are not willing to pay.
Yeah.
So the idea is it's meant to be a threat. Now, to people that may have jobs and families and mortgages and it's a first offence, they'll probably go, I'll find the money because I really can't afford to be out of work for a month, because the boss might say, you're not coming back to me, or whatever. 0 contract hours, they need to make money and all. So what you'll find is they probably say, well, I'll find that £1,000. Others say, and there are prisons.
Well, this is similar to the American system, because in America, you obviously it's a little bit different, but you have the bail system, don't you? So you can actually go. It doesn't happen in the UK, but in America, if you're held in prison specifically on remand, but you're held in prison and your bail is set at $20,000 or $2,000, for example, you can go to a bail bondsman. You put up collateral traditionally to them of a car or a house or whatever it might be.
You promise to pay.
Yeah, they will then pay the money. And then you're bailed, but you're bailed on their conditions. So if you breach your bail, they come and hunt you down and take you back to jail to get their money back type of stuff.
We used to have a system, I don't think it exists now, and I will stand corrected by anybody out there. It used to be called bailed on your own recognizance. In other words, you promise to turn up here and there'll be a penalty to pay if you don't, outside any offence that you might get punished for. And then I think that's sort of disappeared now. Bail is given in a different way. You've got police bail, which is different to court bail, of course. Police can bail people off immediately and send you straight home, but it depends on the offence.
I was saying, depending on the offence, some people will wait at home for court, whereas some people will be held in prison.
Yes. Yeah, you might find driving offences, they might let you go on bail until they're happy.
But the judges will always make the decision on whether you're held in a prison until trial, as opposed to like the police or the solicitors. It's the judge's choice to go.
It's about the prosecution and it's about the defence, because the prosecutor say we think this prisoner should be not given bail. Why? Because we believe they're a flight risk. Because of previous times they've been a flight risk or committed crimes while on bail before.
Because they're going to intimidate, or because
the defence argue the other thing, and the judge makes a decision on. And that's just going to bring me to that point I mentioned before, which I thought was quite interesting. Just a few days ago, a man was arrested for tying himself to a goalpost in a professional Premier League football match. With those plastic ties up against the goalpost. He had a protest going on about something, I don't know, but that's immaterial. He got arrested. He spent just over, I think it was nearly 2.5 months in prison on remand. Right?
So a waiting trial.
And then when he went and was guilty, because he pleaded guilty, he didn't deny the offence as such, and the judge gave him 6 weeks in prison. But he was released straight away because that 6 weeks was smaller than the 2.5 months he'd already served.
So let's break that down. He does a peaceful protest, which is
breaking the match for 15 minutes.
So he is breaking the law, but it's a small law. It's not a law that's really like going to damage society or murder. No. It's a law, but it's a small law.
It disrupted the match for 15 minutes. So
he's been held on remand in a prison. So basically, being held for 2 months, awaiting trial. He goes to trial. Pleads guilty because he's happy to say, I did it, I'm holding my hands up, and obviously because he's protesting, that's obviously part of the process, but I'm sure will be media attention. And the judge sentenced him to 6 weeks. He's just done 8.
Well, but nearly 10, I think it was. But the judge gave him 6 weeks because he felt that was the right sentence. But the man had already spent longer, so they had to release him straight away.
So what does he get for that last 4 weeks?
He doesn't go come out the money back for the
I was going to say, surely because they do it that way.
But the bit that I found interesting, first of all, would you have given him bail and spent a lot of money keeping someone like that? He isn't what I call, he's just one of the, he was
not dangerous, is he?
He's not a risk to society.
He might have been part of the green and all those... what they call
I wasn't sure he was going to go. Very well restrained there, Mr. Goodwin.
Yeah, you know.
I know what you're saying. It could be anybody. Climate change, or
climate
police,
change, I'm sure it was. But that's academic.
Postal, or utilities.
What I found interesting was not the fact. First of all, he'd have been happy to be on bail and go, I'm more than happy to come to court, and I'll get every TV camera that's there to come with me because I want the appetite. But if you get somebody invade a pitch. And I've seen it happen a number of times. People that go on the pitch, the supporters, they're all on the pitch, jumping and laughing or not laughing, disrupt the game for up to 15 to 20 minutes. All they do is put them back on the stands and carry on with the game. They don't arrest those people for disrupting matches because that's what his offence was, disrupting the match. I'm not quite sure.
Is that because there's too many of them?
Well, does it matter?
Well, I mean, yes, it does make
So
a
if you want to commit a crime, do it with lots of people,
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
they'll only arrest 1 or 2 of you.
Yeah, that's exactly what happens in riots.
They just get all the people back on the terrace and crack on.
When you have like riots, for example, I mean, it's been a while now, but when we think back to some of the May Day riots and stuff like that, and some of the big riots in the UK and London and such like, when it happens en masse, generally, not generally, but a lot of times people will get away with, looting and throwing stuff and all those kind of things. Sometimes
They can only identify people they see committing crimes.
I was going to say, obviously that's changing now because CCTV is much better. They go and get them post the event.
But they're identifying people committing crimes. So if people are coming onto a pitch,
you can see who they are, and they're all ticketed.
So, exactly. So why is that one individual?
Yeah,
because it's too expensive.
Technically, they did exactly the same as that one man did, tied himself to post to disrupt the match. That's all he did it for.
If you're going to commit a crime, do it with loads of people, because it's not worth the person's time to take you all to prison.
No. So I look at the law and I go, sometimes you look at the law and you think, don't seem to make a lot of sense to me.
I'm just going to put that out there. We're not advocating committing crime with lots of people or committing crime at all. We're just saying that if you're going to, that's the way to do it. No, we're not advocating it whatsoever. So please don't commit crimes and say
and
that.
The thing is, we've talked very much that they're around prison sentences, and a lot of that comes down to the more violent crimes. But that's not the only types of sentences. So obviously you've got your community sentences, and stuff, and there's a lot more.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that. Yeah,
you've got fines, you've got probation, you've got community service. You've got other kinds of exterior kinds of systems going on. Prison generally, you'd like to think, is going to be a last resort for most judges, unless the crime itself demands that person needs to be put away for the safety of the public. Because it could be a first offence, of course. Well, and you're going to go to prison for that.
Let's come on to that and the types of sentences you get for certain crimes. Whilst we talk about community service, did you watch the series The Others that Stephen Merchant wrote?
No, I haven't seen that.
You should watch that.
And
also, they filmed it, the prison sections, they filmed in Shepton Mallet Prison.
Yeah.
Which is a nice little plug, and I think is probably exactly the right time. To see how that just shoehorned in there. That's a perfect time to take a quick break. You're listening to Life Behind Bars, and we'll be right back after this.
You are listening to Life Behind Bars, produced and created by 50mm Media.
Unlock the past and discover what life was like at Shepton Mallet Prison. Relive the history of past prisoners over the last 400 years. Experience what a Victorian prison cell was like for those incarcerated. See where executions were carried out. Walk the landings and prison wings. You'll hear stories of those who worked and lived behind its high walls. See it, touch it, feel it on a journey of discovery at the nation's oldest prison. Visit SheptonMalletPrison.com today to find out more.
You're listening to Life Behind Bars, produced and created by 50mm Media.
Welcome back to Life Behind Bars. Today we're talking about prison sentences. Now I'm curious, it's going to be a really hard question to answer, but let's just pick up in terms of crimes and sentences and try and compare them as best as we can. I know they're ranges, so let's take burglary, for example. So you commit burglary, break into somebody's house, first offence.
That's down to a judge. That's down to a judge to decide whether they give them the minimum that they're entitled to give them or the maximum. Now, it depends if you're a first-timer. I suspect the judges will lean towards the minimum amount of time to see if that's an effective remedy for somebody that's going to be a burglar. If not, then those times may be going up. And it depends on how many burglaries. So if it's multiple burglaries, it may then end up, over a period of time, may push the sentence upwards, of course.
Don't look at other offences as well as that.
Sorry?
Other offences in general.
Yes.
Yeah, so
that's a broad-based brush they use.
Yeah, so if you're committing more crimes,
yes,
and then you commit another crime, get caught, chances are judge is going to look at it and go, well, you keep doing it. This clearly isn't working as a deterrent or as a rehabilitation, so we're going to punish you further.
I don't know. Judges make decisions based. I suppose they're all individuals, so they make decisions based on what they see in front of them at the time.
But if you've got somebody that is rechurning, that comes out of prison, goes back to prison, comes out of prison, comes back to prison, comes out of prison, goes back to prison, eventually you're going to be in front of a judge, and the judge is just go, this isn't working. It doesn't work as a deterrent because you keep doing it. Clearly you're not rehabilitating because you keep doing it. Now there might be mitigating factors to the reasons why. So do they then just start applying harsher punishments, harsher sentences?
The harsher sentences also allow for...
Longer sentences, I should say, sorry, not
longer
harsher.
sentences also allow for more rehabilitation work.
Yeah,
so
it does.
a short sentence, you don't necessarily get access to the same types of programs as longer sentences because some programs are 6 months long. If you
Okay, so let's say that, let's just take burglary, for example. Burglary, car theft, you know, what kind of one in the same in the sense of you're stealing something that's not yours or breaking in and stealing something. If you commit the same crime over and over and over, your crime doesn't increase. It's still just you stealing cars or you just breaking into houses, I say just breaking into houses, just stealing cars, but you're continuously doing it, then effectively each time or after a certain amount of time, judges are going to start giving you longer sentences.
But there's a limit.
To the top of the tariff.
They can go to the top of the tariff.
Yeah. So the limit is at the top of the tariff, effectively. What I think you're saying is that that's almost beneficial for the prisoner because now they can get onto courses they can't do on shorter sentences, which will help them rehabilitate and therefore not commit crime.
That also depends because before that they can be given rehabilitation orders on community sentences.
Yeah.
So community sentences, there's 13, 14 different things that so that you can have your unpaid work, you also have rehabilitation.
What happens if
I
they
think
don't
we've got to assume that wherever possible, and I not guarantee this of course, but wherever possible, I imagine judges at magistrates level were limited to a 12 months maximum by the way of more than one sentence.
Yeah.
You can only give a prisoner 6 months on an individual offence. So if there's 2 offences, they can give 2 individual sentences of 6 months consecutive to make it 12 months, but they're limited to 12. They're thinking of changing it, giving magistrates the ability to go to 2 years, and that's to ease Crown Courts off. Because magistrates can send a prisoner up to Crown Court for sentence if they don't believe within their powers that sentence is long enough. So they can go, I believe you should have longer than that, and the law allows for that, but I can't give it to you, so I'm going to send you up to Crown Court for sentencing. And the prisoner can go, and that's where the judge, they might still give them the same 12 months, but he might give them 2 years.
Yeah.
Or he might even only give them 6 months. But that's the risk that the magistrate takes by sending them up for a longer sentence. And there's, when you think of sentence like that, everybody assumes that it's there's 2 kinds of sentences, the determinate sentences and there's indeterminate sentences. In other words, no end date.
Just break those down for people very quickly, the difference between
So determinate sentence is fixed. Yeah. It's a fixed time, maximum time. Of that, there's an expectation there'll be a period of time in there where you will be released and you'll go out onto licence.
So 12 months, maximum you can do is 12 months, but you might get out after.
Well, you usually get out
roughly about halfway through.
So you
it's
get,
not an absolute guarantee.
Guaranteed maximum of 12.
Right.
But you could get out of at 6 and then you'd be on licence for 12.
But the law's been changed relatively recently because there used to be times when you got 10 years and you could get out roughly about 5. But that's not true. Depending on the offence now, and it depends, I think if the offence is one of violence or drugs or serious, what they call it the serious offences, and that's probably got its own list, of which there'll be many things in it, of course. If you get 7 years or longer, then you don't get this half time out. What you do is you're looking at a 2/3 system now, where you will serve longer. So if you get 10 years, you're likely to serve closer to 7 years rather than 5. And even then, it's a parole decision whether you get released. Whereas anything like below that 4 years and under is relatively automated unless there's a reason that it shouldn't be. And it's really
deemed as not major, not maybe minor, but not major.
It's become more complicated because I remember years ago, many years ago, they used to have the Habitual Criminals Act. And what a judge could do under
it's been a proper school day.
Did you say habitual?
Habitual criminals.
Okay. Now that makes some sense now.
Yeah, habitual criminal.
I'm still lost.
Yeah, and the reality is judges then could give you a life sentence based on the Habitual Criminals Act. You were just an incorrigible person. You were in and out for the same on and on and on. You are never going to change. You are never going to change. And so there's no point in us making this effort of trying to give you a
that's what I was saying earlier about people that might commit the same crime over and over and over and over. They never increase it, but they're going to continue to do it.
But it was technically a life sentence, of which then they might get out later. They replaced that because they did away with it altogether. Then it was replaced about 2002 with what they call IPP.
Yeah.
when you think about it, so prisoners didn't have to commit a murder to end up with a life sentence or a very serious crime. Judges could give an IPA, imprisonment for public protection, which sounds a bit like habitual criminal act. So what they did is they could then go, you're now serving an IPP. There is no end date, so it's indeterminate,
Right,
but your minimum term will be 3 years.
So indeterminate is the opposite. You get a minimum term rather than a maximum term,
Yes.
and it just keeps going until.
Yes. Now the big problem
that's what you used to work
the big
with, wasn't
problem
it,
with
in terms of
IPP
IPP
sentences is that the idea behind it was quite sound when you think about it. It was said, there's 3 years. You can expect to be released in 3, possibly 4 years, but the condition is you must apply yourself to the programs that you've been given based on judgments about what you need. So that made some sense. The problem with it is they never resourced it. There were prisoners sitting in jail. I got a prison when I was at Featherstone. He was 9 years in and he got a 4-year tariff date on his indeterminate. He was already serving 9 years. And he said, I've always been willing to do the
There
course.
wasn't the space, yeah.
But they haven't got it for me.
That was the
They
thing
couldn't.
about Shepton, wasn't
So
it?
that's why it
Shepton-
failed and they did away with it in 2012, IPPs.
I remember that in Shepton Mallet Prison, which is where you worked. Or maybe you're better to say it than me about the whole. It was under resourced, and there was only so many spaces on the programme.
Yeah.
And there was only, I think it was like 3 prisons in the country or something like that that ran specific programmes, of which Shepton was one. It wasn't many. There were only so many places. So there's 50 places in the whole country, but there's 500 people that need them.
Yes.
Places take so long that some people have to go through them twice. And although it's not quite as simple as it is on the outside, where it's like, well, there's so many places, well, I'll just drive to a different training centre. You've got to apply, and then you can't just be dropped down there for the day. You've got to be in that prison, so you've got to get switched over into that jail, which means somebody else has got to come out.
Yeah, but there are still prisoners in prison today on the IPP sentence, and it was done away with 10 years ago. We did away with IPPs, so somebody that was caught right at the back end of that IPP in 2011, 2012 as a sentence might have been given 5 or 6 or 7 years as the minimum and gone way beyond it, because it's about
Can prisoners pay to have those programmes done privately? Because you could obviously go and do those
Not that
programmes
I'm aware of,
privately,
but-
the same as you can do healthcare privately. You can, you've got a bad knee at the moment, so you can wait for the NHS, or you can pay to go privately.
Yeah, I'm not aware of that, I must be honest. The criminal justice system, I don't think allows for that to happen.
I mean,
There's
in
too
fairness,
much
majority
scope
of prisoners
there
probably couldn't afford to pay for
No.
it privately, but
No.
I'm just
And it
curious as to whether it's...
creates a lot of scope for debate over quality.
Quality, yeah. Well, they proved that with the probation service when they privatised one half of the probation service.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I'm not sure the quality argument would be quite the same. Again, I know I can prove this because we both have a friend that works both for their role in the NHS and also works privately, and they deliver the same service. Same as a lot of
I'm not
doctors that
talking
do.
about the quality of the programme necessarily. I'm talking here about the recommendation at the end of it, depending on who's paying for that thing. So if someone's paying, if that person's paying for something,
I
you
think
want a recommendation for release at the end.
they pay for upfront,
Does that make
regardless of
sense?
recommendation, as opposed to,
but-
well, here's 50% upfront and 50% upon you giving
Clearly,
the
you
judgment.
but even so, it
Yeah, that's what
creates
you're saying,
They created a thing that was...
what's it called when the conflict of interest? If potentially creates a conflict of interest depending on that payment.
I believe all that can be eradicated, but I do believe you're
But
they
correct,
did bring
because
out,
the trouble. Hold on, sorry,
something, I think-
Hold on 2 seconds. I think you're right, because the problem is the only people that will be able to afford it are going to be probably those that maybe shouldn't be on it. Like it's going to be the higher echelons of society. It's going to be your footballers, whatever it might be, and they can therefore they're just paying to get
Creates too
out of
much
jail, which is
corruption.
back to the
Yeah.
Georgian system of
When they
you
split
go
up-
from out, go.
When they split up the probation service,
Sorry.
they all brought out a thing, I think it was called something to do, some kind of community service programs written in there. And it was a bit like your ETS programs, your COG skills programs. And the reality with that is the government said, yeah, we're going to have all these outside agencies and you can set them up in all the different areas around the country. However, we're only going to pay you on results. First of all, I go, how do you measure result? How long do you measure it over? When does it become a successful? If you only get paid in it, there's a huge risk then there may be some manipulation of that, what's passed and what's failed, to get income coming in. And it just failed. What is a result if somebody doesn't commit a crime for 6 months? Is that a result?
It
12
comes
months,
back-
2 years? How long do you wait?
It comes back to that investment in preventative, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Instead of always worrying about later on. It's like they
The
spent
horse is
there in
bolted.
the first place and not worrying about
Horse is
that.
golden now, close the gate.
Yeah.
Let me go back to the lower ends of sentences. So 12 months and less, and I think there was a figure, I can't remember what it's off the top of my head, and Graham, you'll probably know it. There's a huge percentage of the current prison population that are on 12 months or less.
The last time I did the research, remember these figures will be always a couple of years old coming from government sources.
of
And
course.
it is from a government source as well. And 46% of prisoners in jail serve 6 months or less.
6 months or less.
6
So
months
nearly
serve 6
half,
months. That,
half
it might
the
get
prison
12,
population.
or it might be an actual sentence of 6 months and do 3, or it may be 12 and only serve 6.
So we're talking about
46%.
43,000 people. So nearly half,
yes.
about 43,000 prisoners at the moment are in prison on a sentence of 6 months or less,
And,
or
there's
12 months.
and there is an honest question to ask there. The honest question to ask is, what do you do with somebody that may only be serving 5 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, or 15 weeks?
Yeah,
What do
you've
you
got to
do
do a
with somebody
program.
like that? What is the value to the prisoner, and what is the value to society? Now, we understand about punishment, and we talked about that, and we talked about putting people away, hopefully to put them off committing crime. We understand all that. But if somebody's coming in time and time and time again, then obviously it's not a deterrent, whatever you're giving them. The answer may be, in some cases, then give them longer, but that may be more detrimental than positive, or try to deal with it before you get to that problem in the first place, and that comes back to prevention, of course. But the answer is, we've got a huge amount of our prisoners on this roundabout, in and out of jail. By the time you've got them on a course, you're off next week, lad. Where to? Oh, we got you going off now. You're going to start. I'm getting out in 2 weeks' time because I've been given HTC. Tagging, as they call it.
Yeah.
Because if you serve under 4 years, you have got a good chance of receiving some time off that half time. So you may not serve 2, you might only serve just over 18 months because you might get 3 or 4 months on electronic tagging. That's usually an incentive that's given for good behaviour in prison, and governors decide on that, whether that's with the team, of course, whether that's allowed. So it's still a decision that's made. It's not automatic HTC, but there is an emphasis on governors to give it wherever it's possible to give it, so that, because to keep the prison population numbers down and to get prisoners out sooner than later. That's how it goes.
It comes to looking, when it's habitual in that sense, where they keep repeat offending, then it's looking at, isn't it, preventive, but also that support when they are back out then to help change.
Yeah, how do you do that? You know, and it's not easy.
I don't know.
And it doesn't work with everybody. It never
Yeah, I
works.
don't know if you'll know this off the top of your head, or whether it's something we'll probably have to research, I would imagine. How many of those 43,000 prisoners are on first offences?
No, I wouldn't know without looking at the research.
Because I know that when I spoke to a governor, a prison governor.
First offences are not commonly coming to jail. First offenders, unless it's a serious crime.
First
Because
jail
quite a
visit,
small
right? Maybe not
percentage that
first.
get sentenced,
Maybe
isn't
not
it?
first offences. First prison sentence.
Yes,
Yeah.
there may be a whole history of some kind of very low level crime.
Because there is a
up to that.
difference between the first time you actually go into jail, because even walking through it on a public tour, for example, or just being able to see the inside, which of course you can now do, is a case of going, people see it and go, oh my God, it's really actually quite bleak. When you actually see it physically, as opposed to on TV shows or on YouTube, whatever it might be, there is a difference seeing it in your own world, standing in a cell, shutting the door behind you, realising how small it is, looking at the beds, the bed springs, everything that kind of comes with it, that reality. And I know that there was a governor I spoke to, an ex-prison governor, and he said that his belief was anybody that gets a first custodial sentence of 6 months or less should serve a maximum of 10 days.
And that's the taster, I suppose.
Yeah, and that's exactly where he was coming from. It's because what he was explaining is, he goes, the first few days of prison, the very first time you come, he goes, depending on the level of crime, but realistically, if it's a big crime, it's a long sentence anyway. Within the 6 months, the type of sentences, so you come in and the first few days are, oh my God, oh my Christ, how am I going to survive this? And you're sort of really trying to figure out.
That's
he said
interesting because...
Sorry, 2 seconds. So he said after 7 to 10 days. And specifically, I think his margin was around the 7 to 10 day mark. He wasn't exactly sure whether it was 7 days or 10 days, he said. But at that point, you suddenly realise prison maybe isn't as difficult or as challenging or as potentially dangerous, and they are still dangerous, as maybe you thought. And suddenly the stereotypes have gone. And what happens is you start to then connect with other prisoners and you start to learn. And before you know it, you're actually maybe having more of an education rather than a deterrent. So he was like, but that short stint is enough to scare you, but not, what's the word? Not.
You get comfortable.
Yeah,
learn how to survive it.
Yeah,
and as I say, that's what I think it is. Rather than it's being less scary, you learn how to survive, how to live.
Well, yeah, but then it becomes less scary. That's the definition of becoming less scary. The threat might be not any greater or worse.
When you said less dangerous, so it's not about less dangerous, it is about
Sorry.
I've often wondered about the carrot and the stick with the prison sentence, because when I started off in the old Borstal system, the sentence was automatically 6 months minimum to 2 years long. Judges didn't have a choice in that. They said, I sentence you to Borstal training. That's all. You had open and closed Borstals, which was a good thing. So your non-violent prisoner were not locked up in the same place as some of your violent young men were. It was 17 to 21 years old that you were held there. And if you were in that place, you could serve a minimum of 6 months. And it was all depending on your attitude and behaviour. So what there was a carrot and a stick. If you get your heads down, do your education that you need, or do your vocational training, and you behave in a proper way, and you switch on and get caught up and all that, you're looking at about 7 months at a push. They always said the target date was 40 weeks for a prisoner, so just on 10 months. But some got out in 8 or 9, the very best behaviour ones, really first-timers that were coming into jail. And then they said, but you can spend a lot longer in jail if you want to. This is really your choice. We're giving you the responsibility for how long you spend in jail.
I say this to my child when I send her to a bedroom. It's like, how long you stay in
some relative sense.
Yeah.
But then they changed that in the early 80s, and they changed it to determinate sentences. So they might give a young offender 3 months in jail. And what you might get with that is, so if I don't really break the rules really badly, but I just don't bother with any programs and tell them I can't be arsed, I'll just sit in a room and do nothing, as long as I don't do anything that attracts a longer sentence, you'll have to let me out in 3 months' time. Yes. Yeah. Okay, then I ain't going to do anything. I'll just sit in a classroom and just twiddle with a pencil and write a lot of rubbish on there, because you can't keep me any longer than you can keep me. Because you've given me 3 months, you've given me a determinate sentence. Whereas with the Borstal system, the choice is yours, lad. Yeah. It's up to you. The better you do, the quicker you get out the door.
And that comes down to resourcing again, because that's like the IPP situation.
You must have the resources to fill it up.
You've got people on short sentences who can get out after that short sentence if they've made some progress.
Yes.
But you need the resourcing of education.
I'm not sure that. I mean, resourcing is definitely a problem, without a doubt. If you, again, listen to episode 3.
The only true thing you can start straight away when a prisoner first steps in jail, the only effective thing, the thing that can actually start the day they come in, is detox for a drug offender.
Yeah, but
you can do that immediately, and you can be effective over the next few weeks, few months, whatever. Yeah. What the outcome of that is after the event and where you go from that point on. It's about the only thing you can start, and you can do some very basic education. But I've got to be honest, no offence to the teachers, they did a wonderful job in Shrewsbury, but we're not holding the prisoners very long. We're not.
Yeah, no, I get it.
It's English, maths.
We had a lot of education, but we were working with
you're never going to stay to do anything.
Let me come back to prison sentences. We're jumping off the point slightly. What you said a minute ago, what you're describing there about young offenders, you literally just described my life with my daughter who's 11 and a half. Because what you've described, and I agree, resourcing is a problem. You listen to episode 3, we spent a lot of time talking about under-resourcing. I'm sure we'll talk about that a lot more. But actually, I wonder whether there's a huge piece here about the way that we actually think about it. And I like to think that I'm a relatively intelligent, academic intelligent, but world intelligent, and a relatively decent person. And what I see with my child is exactly what you've just done there. She might do something, break some rules. I said rules, but she might do something in a sense of whatever it might be. I'm sure there'll be people listening that've got kids that can appreciate you. Obviously, you've got children, so in that sense of there are times you go, right, go to your room.
So that's a custodial sentence.
Exactly that. So I'm sending her to a room, and she's like, how long will I go into my room for? Well, you go for 10 minutes. Well, I bloody hate you. 15 minutes. Right, there you go. 20 minutes. We're not going to swear. The swear in my phone. Right, half an hour. Want to try for an hour?
Yeah.
Whoa. So she'll go in. And sometimes I'll leave her Alexa in there so she can listen to music so the help comes down. Other times I'll be like, nope, I'm having that. You're not having anything. You've got books and toys and stuff. I take it. She's safe, she's secure, but that is absolutely a custodial sentence. And then based on what she does next, depends on how long she stays there. So if she comes out and says, I'm really sorry, Dad, that was really mean of me, and I apologise. We might have a conversation about it, and she might do a whole sentence of half an hour. She might do half a sentence because I'm like, do you know what, I should probably let her out. Maybe I was a little bit harsh, whatever. And that comes out. I promise you, she will repeat offend within a couple of days. Guarantee it. But the sentence won't get harsher, it's just the same sentence. So what I'm getting at here, I'm sure there will be people out there get this, it can't just be me, is that's exactly the same as what we're doing with the Borstal system or with the young offender system.
In a different way, but
Is that not a problem in the way that both that system and also the way me as a parent are dealing with my young offender? Because there must be a different way of getting to where we want to be, which is that she's happier, we don't have those kind of eruptions in quite the same way. They're always going to happen to a point because they're kids, but you know, she doesn't end up in a custodial environment where she's locked in her room. Not locked in her room, I should say.
This is more Emma's field, really.
But I'm just saying, is that not, we're talking about the problem is resourcing, and that's definitely part of the problem, but actually isn't the big part of the problem the way that we look at it? I'll shut up there now, but I'll say one more thing. I heard Dawn French say this in an interview, and she said, the time you hate your child the most, which is when they're kicking off, screaming, punching, shouting, swearing, whatever it might be, that's the time they need the most amount of love.
Yes, it's the time you love, and it's the biggest guilt time for you as well. Nobody punishes a child because they think it makes me feel good. When we punish a child,
unfortunately, there are some people out there that do. But
my daughter was a past master, and I'll tell you this, I told her to head to her bedroom sometime, and as I'm walking from the living room to the kitchen, there'd be this little piece of paper floating down the stairs to them, and I pick it up and she go, I love you very much, Daddy, I'm really sorry I've been such a naughty girl. Will you read me a story before I go to bed? And I had to resist it for a little while, but I went up a lot sooner than I might have done had she never done that. But we managed. That's human life, folks.
But how many times did that happen?
A couple of times. But we were all the same. That's human nature, folks. You have to have some kind of system. I suppose you can call it punishment if you want, or correction. That's just human nature. Animals do it as well. They correct their cubs and their young when they...
But dogs do it by biting them.
Yes, but they bite them in such a way.
Yeah,
but dogs don't have other means, do they? They don't say, well, let's sit down and have a conversation. Woof, woof, arf, arf, if dogs were conscious, they communicate.
Where we're going anymore.
No, let me bring it back on this point. Because the thing was, I looked at this in reflection. This was a prison sentence. I gave my daughter a prison sentence.
Yes, a custodial sentence, you did.
And I looked at it afterwards and do you know what? When the very beginning point where it started, where it changed, where it escalated from, I was like, maybe what I should have done was just given her a hug. Or maybe I should have just, I should have applied love as opposed to, I guess, the stick, more carrot, less stick.
Did you,
The thing is, there is a difference there between, but by the time we've got to the prison part, and where we're doing repeat prison sentences as opposed to a child going to their room.
Hopefully child are going to experience learning.
Yeah, in the resource front,
Yeah.
there is a difference there. In a family environment, there's a lot less people, and you can maybe apply a slightly different approach and a different mentality into how you view something as well, depending what the scenario is, and the emotional reaction on both parts.
Yeah.
When it comes to repeat offences, you do need resources because you're talking about multiple numbers, and both situations is coming down to education.
Well,
You're helping them learn how to control emotions. So that's all comes back to education again. But to provide education to however many thousand prisoners, that needs more resource than the one parent and the one child.
Did you ever sit down with your daughter and decide between you what would be a good set of punishments and behaviour?
Joel, I have done that in the past with my kids, and
it's quite interesting.
It's always playtime, chocolate, iPad. They're very good at self-actualization. They're very good at self-punishment in that sense. And it's difficult because I don't want to punish kids. So I think we've come slightly off the point, but I think it was what I was just getting at, and it's really apparent to me as well from wandering around prisons, having conversations like, God, how often do I put my children in prison? Because that's exactly what we're doing.
There's a whole element of society that still believes in actual corporal punishment and actually physically harming a child.
I saw this the other day on somebody's face on Facebook and saying, well, part of the problem nowadays is kids don't have any discipline at home. If you smack them, it's not going to do any damage to them.
Well, I remember somebody saying that, and he said, I give my children a good clout when they deserved it, and they're good people. And I said, well, how do you know they weren't going to be good people if you never touched them? You can't always lay that hitting them proves the theory.
No, hitting a child will never, ever benefit a child's behaviour.
Prison populations have increased, so therefore how did hitting of those children help?
Hitting, and we're all from a generation, you certainly are, but we're all from a generation where children were hit. Yes. You're from a generation where it would happen at school on a semi-regular basis.
Caning existed when I was in school.
Caning didn't exist in our lifetime, but certainly, hitting kids and that's never going to be that.
But you'll always have an argument with that, and you might get some responses to that, because everybody thinks differently. In actual fact, I don't think it's against the law in this country, is it yet?
No, it is. Yeah, you can't.
That must be the reason I thought it wasn't actually against the law.
I don't think it is a law.
In Scotland it is.
We're going to take a break, so I will check that. So,
yes.
You're listening to Life Behind Bars. We're going to take a very short break now, and we'll be right back after this.
You are listening to Life Behind Bars, produced and created by 50mm Media.
Welcome to Shrewsbury Prison, Shropshire's #1 tourist destination. Step behind the gates of this 200-year-old prison and discover an unknown world. Heritage tours run by ex-officers, where you can see the cells, walk the landings, see and touch the history. But there's so much more going on. Experience one of our brilliant activities or take part in our world-renowned events. From escape rooms to axe throwing, overnight sleepovers to prison break, we do it all. And there's something for all the family, with activities starting from 8 years, events from 12 years, and heritage tours for all ages. Visit our restaurant and experience food behind bars. There really is so much to see, do and discover on a day out at Shrewsbury Prison. Visit us at www.shrewsburyprison.com.
You're listening to Life Behind Bars, produced and created by 50mm Media.
Welcome back to Life Behind Bars. You're watching episode 4, and today we're discussing prison sentences. As we left for the break, we were just talking about smacking children. I've done the research in the break, as I said I would. As we said, in Scotland, it is unlawful for a parent to smack their child. That was brought in 7th November 2020. It's nearly 2 years ago. And will be 2 years ago probably by the time this airs. In England, it is unlawful for a parent to smack their child in England, except, there's that key word there, where this may amount to a reasonable punishment.
And how do you define that?
Yeah, what's reasonable?
Well, I felt putting my child in her room is a reasonable punishment, but smacking them for me would be too far. Absolutely. I think hitting kids is far beyond.
You can't measure.
You shouldn't hit anybody. You can't hit an adult, so why should you hit a child?
No, that's right.
Like any form of hitting an adult is classed as assault. Why isn't it? Why is that child got less rights? That's human
We talk
rights.
about prison sentences, and if there's a man that recently headbutted a teacher because his daughter was so disruptive, they literally had to call the parents. They called the mother, they called the father. He turned up, stood in front of the headmaster, and went whack and nutted him. And literally, without any chance of that headmaster explaining, he probably knew his daughter was disruptive anyway. Most parents do know when their children are difficult.
Yeah.
But so one assumes that he's going to get a prison sentence for that, but he probably won't. Because ABH is not always an imprisonable offence. But then we decide we can define all that. So, well, it's okay to do that to your children. Not in the same way, of course, but remember, a little child is smacked to them may be just as vicious to them as being headbutted to
he could have headbutted the teacher, which he did, got arrested, charged with ABH, but he could have stood in the same room, clouted the child, round the back of the head, or whatever it might be.
And justified as being reasonable.
Justified as reasonable, yeah. So
how do we know that young girl that's so disruptive in the classroom hasn't already suffered that kind of behaviour? We have no idea.
Probably, potentially does.
So she's quite wild because she doesn't understand the structure of discipline or anything.
Well, again, randomly, I had this conversation with my daughter this morning. She missed the bus. I don't think it was her fault, fairness. So I drove her to school, and on the way to school, we were actually having a conversation about the weekend because she had a custodial sentence for a portion of the weekend. It wasn't long; it was about 30 minutes. I think twice, actually. I think she had a repeat offence this weekend. Anyway, she said to me, were you naughty like that when you were a child? I said, yeah. She said, well, what happened? She was asking about missing the bus, and I was saying what her grandma did, what my mum did, and stuff like that, and how it happens. I said, the thing is, the way I like to look at it, I know we're slightly off point, but we'll get back to it, is that I was saying to her that you always try and improve parenting from the way your parents parented you, because hindsight's a wonderful thing. So I like to think that I learned the bad bits of how I was parented and the positive bits, and I encourage the positive bits and a little bit more. I said, so when you have kids and you parent, ideally, you'll push the bad bits to one side, my bad parts of parenting, of which there are many parts that are bad, and you'll keep the good bits, and you'll do that, and it will keep improving generation on generation on generation. I said, unfortunately, the opposite is also true. That you get people that parent badly, hit their children. I use that exact example. They hit their children or mistreat their children, or the way they behave, the children witness. So the children behave in that same way, and maybe even worse, because the boundaries always get slightly bigger. So they behave, and on and on and on. So generations, this might be getting better in our family, it could be getting worse in others. And I was like, and that's where it comes back down to.
It comes back to more community and society support and preventative.
Education, rehabilitation.
It comes back to education. And I'm not talking about school education. I'm not talking about academics.
Life.
I'm talking about life and support and interactions. And those families that need it are the ones who, more often than not, end up in this cycle of these prison sentences that we started off on. And if there was that early preventative support, then that needs resourcing, then maybe we wouldn't be in.
And you're absolutely right. There's a charity that we work with. Emma and I both sit on a charitable board, and the charity that we work with, that we sit on the board with, they partner with other charities, and one of the charities they've been chatting with is a charity called Children Seen and Heard. Which is a charity supporting specifically children of people that have gone to prison, because they have seen a world that most children don't even know exists, and what's allowed to.
They've seen a lifetime in the first 10 years of their life, some of these kids.
Coming back to prison sentences, because I think that's when we were.
Got the family bit out the way.
Let's go to the top end.
Top end?
Yeah. Life sentences.
Life sentences.
So much confusion from the public over life sentences.
Well, there is, because when I do the tours with people, I always ask them, anybody tell me how long a life sentence is, and I will always get a number given back to me.
It's life.
No, but they'll say 10 years. And I go, you're correct. And they go 20. I go, you're correct. You're all correct. Underneath 99 years technically, life sentences are automatically for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
The only thing that judges can do, they can set a minimum term of that sentence. So if they go, I'm giving you a life sentence and you're going to be serving a minimum term, the tariff date, they call it, is 15 years, 20 years, you will serve that to that day. It doesn't matter how well behaved you are. You can be the greatest prisoner that's ever walked into the prison system in the world. That's your minimum term, unless there's something like intervention by life-threatening illness, terminal illness might change that just before you die.
So you get released into a hospice, for example, terminal cancer.
But let's exclude that and say under normal condition. That's it. You don't guarantee. I've known prisoners with 20-year tariff dates still in jail after 25, sometimes up to 30 years. Parole boards make the decision about whether you go at that earliest point in time or sometime after that event. And then when you come out, you're on life license for the rest of your life, which means there's a huge amount of control placed on you while you're living. You're still a prisoner, you're just allowed to live outside the doors. That's all.
It was one of the things I always found I had to explain to people. Like you'd see in the media when there's been this particularly high profile case and they've been given like 10, 15 years, and there's always this big outcry about 10 years, that's not, it's nothing, blah, blah.
It is what it is.
And often, they'll be out in like 5 years. No, with a life sentence, that's the minimum served time. And then they have to have proved that
they have to go through
safe.
programs that you would have run.
They have to prove and there needs to be evidence that behavioural evidence that they are a reduced risk to society before they're there.
Now, it's interesting that, because I remember a prisoner coming back here initially to us. He was arrested because he breached his licence and he missed 2 appointments with the people, like it wasn't MAPA then, but it was something else. And it took him nearly 3 years to get re-released, because the emphasis is on the prisoner. When you get arrested, and the parole board generally have made the decision to recall you back to prison, and that's for breach of licence, not committing another crime, the emphasis is on you to get your barristers, solicitors to argue why you should be released. It isn't the parole board's job to make that judgment. You have to prove to them. And the other thing I'd like to say, which many people may disagree with, and I understand that, I don't necessarily disagree with this, but when they decide whether a prisoner should be released or not, at any stage where the parole board's involved, it's never based on the offence, it's based on the risk.
Yeah.
It sounded hard to get your head because you will have somebody who's committed a horrific crime.
David McCreevy.
Yeah, and they serve 20 or 30 years in jail. When the parole board look at whether that person will be released, they don't go, what did he do? They know what they've done. They go, what is the risk when they step outside this door? Is it a manageable risk or not? And I've got to be honest with the parole board, there's always going to be a risk involved. In human nature, you cannot get everything right all the time. But I know some people may say, well, lock them up all for life. I go, you'll never build enough prisons fast enough.
Well, and the thing is you also get people on these these extended sentences, these life sentences, that they might be the only crime they've ever committed, but it's an emotional crime, and therefore, what's the gain to keeping them in?
Well,
if their risk is deemed to be manageable in the community, then what's the benefit of keeping them inside prison?
And then you've got to start differentiating between murder, which is intent, and then you've got manslaughter, and then you've got culpable manslaughter or voluntary manslaughter and involuntary manslaughter, which attract two different kind of sentences. It is possible to get a life sentence for other things than murder. Judges have discretions over those things. There's literally what they call the mandatory sentence, which the judge has to give out, depending on the crime that's committed. Like murder, I don't have a choice. I can set the tariff date, but I don't have a choice. It's a life sentence. Or they can go, I'm giving you a life sentence based on, I believe it's the right sentence to give you based on the offence that you've committed. And that might decide where their tariff date sits on that. But they're both exactly the same. Whatever they're given for, they're both the same sentences.
When the risk is reviewed, then it's
the risk review depends
how they're managed in the community as well. So those conditions that Graham was talking about in terms of not necessarily breaking laws, it's about they might not be able to go to certain areas, they might only be out in certain hours, might not allowed to be able to have alcohol or computer access. Depending on the crime, the conditions that are set are to reduce the risk of that person.
I think it was about 5 or 6 years ago now. It's actually interesting because the film, the story that was done here, Time, was very loosely, part of it was quite closely based onto a real story. Because about some years ago, it might have been around Manchester area, a headmaster of a school was separated from his wife. And it wasn't a good separation. Went back to the house. Nobody really knows what happens in that, but he ended up killing her. And he got charged with murder. This is his first offence. This is the headmaster of a school that worked probably for early 60s, I think he was, or it might have been 50s anyway. But a good citizen by anybody's standards, right? And I don't know what's happened because I never followed it up, but one assumes that he probably got found guilty and would have been given the life sentence, okay, and all that. So he's in that world then where the chances of him ever coming out and going and committing that kind of crime again is probably so rare. So now you might say they should stay in prison as a punishment, but you've got to ask what the value's got to be of that. If you're going to give somebody all that, you have to realise what the value is going to be. And they go, well, he wouldn't do it again. I say he probably wouldn't do it again anyway. I don't know. I'm not judging.
You've got people that you've worked with.
I'm giving it as
similar cases, haven't you?
As a case rather than a thing. But.
I did work with someone who, again, was.
Oh, here we go. This is. I mentioned this a few episodes ago. This is the balance between the Official Secrets Act and what I can and can't say.
Well,
I'll tell you.
You can't really name people that may be serving a sentence.
Well, I think the trouble is where I'm at is that it's one of those that's a media one, and if she talks about it, it's a difficult one to talk about, and actually it is identifiable.
If it's in the public domain, it's all right.
Let me give you early reprieve. If we take McCreevy, for example, we spoke about him actually when we did the little pilot for this show, and McCreevy committed a horrific offence. I guess it's a point really rather than a question, it's more of a statement, but he committed a horrific offence, sentenced to 20 years, served 45, paroled in 2018, and out with anonymity. And I think we're going to talk about anonymity at another point, we won't have time to do it today, but that's exactly that. And the reason he was released was because he was no longer deemed a danger to the public. The crime was irrelevant. It was the position of behaviour as to where he is now. Whether he should or shouldn't have been released, and I think we'll probably pick this up later in the series, or whether he should or shouldn't have had something like the death penalty, and I know this name will crop back up when we get to the death penalty, because I'll ask the question. But it is that balance.
It comes down to who does it serve to keep someone? If their risk is deemed manageable in society, who does it serve to keep them in prison? Because then it's taxpayer that pays for the prisons to
Yeah,
run. On the victim front, the pain doesn't ever go away, no matter what you do.
no,
Whether
of
that
course,
person's in prison or out of
totally
prison.
agree. Yeah.
The victim side of it,
Yeah.
they are always going to experience the same pain. So therefore, it doesn't. Them being in prison doesn't make you feel better. It doesn't change.
I mean, the
what's happened.
taxpayer will still be paying for it.
The other side of that coin, and I will stand on the other side because I'm not here to give any particular biased view about things personally. There have been prisoners that have been released from prison on a life sentence that have committed murder again.
Yeah.
It happens. It's about how society manages that and whether we think, can you stop it completely? Is it possible? Is that not possible? I think we all in society want everything to be such a definite thing. We want things to be right and never make a mistake, and that's just never going to happen in life. We go through our lives and make loads of mistakes. Fortunately, they're not the ones that get us into prison or harm people. But people, it's good. People make decisions that make mistakes. It's just happened now, just recently. And that's at a government level where they decided that 45p reduction doesn't exist anymore. It's only been out for 10 days and they decided to scrap the 45p tax rate down to 40 and applied it. That's a mistake, but it made a huge difference in society. It affected society. But we won't go down that road.
No, because it's a mistake that shouldn't be made.
It's a mistake that you can say shouldn't have been made in the first place.
Shouldn't have been made. No, if you're running an economy the size of the UK, you shouldn't be making mistakes like that. I expect, I wouldn't expect, no, he shouldn't make mistakes like that. So I was going to give an example.
You can go to any country in the world and you'll never find any society that always gets it right every time.
Okay, so let me just throw a quick figure at you. Now these are pulled off quick levels of research, so maybe 100% accurate, and again they're a couple of years behind the times. But 8,500 people currently in the UK serving a life sentence, which is more than France, Germany, and Italy combined. How many of those people are serving what we call a whole life tariff, guaranteed to stay in prison for their entire life?
I think it floats around about the 65, 67. That figure will change as people die, but it will probably be replaced by people that are coming into the system.
Because do we still give full life tariff?
Yes.
And what for, effectively?
They're usually going to be for terrorist offences, because the judges are limited to that, by the way, as well. They're limited to that. If you're convicted of a single murder, I don't think a whole life tariff is applicable. Yes. They're limited. So it's terrorist offences or mass murder or serial killers.
We spoke about those last in episode.
Now, and they can't give it to anybody under, I think it's under the age of 21. You cannot give a whole life sentence out to technically what we call young offenders, even though that's 21 and under. Interestingly, in Manchester, with the Manchester bomber, obviously, the Manchester bomber took their own lives as well, they arrested the brother some years later, didn't they? Yeah. And they charged him with being conspiring to commit that offence of terrorism. But the judge couldn't give him a whole life tariff, which he would have done had he been over the age. So he gave him 55-year tariff date, the highest tariff date that's ever been given in this country in its history. He said, I can't give you a whole life tariff, but I want you to be in prison for that long. It's academic. And I think he was about 20 at the time, because you get convicted on the age you commit the crime, not the age that you come to court. It's retrospective in that sense. So he said, I can't give you a 55 years tariff date. That will put him up into his 80s, if they bother to release him at all. Yeah. So effectively, it's probably the same thing. He'll probably die before he gets released from prison. But that's because the judge managed to get round that restriction, because there's no restriction on tariff dates, believe it or not. As long as they leave a window of opportunity for them to have some release from prison, however old that might be. Somebody's at 86, has just been convicted of murdering their wife and son 40 odd years ago. Yeah. He's 86 years old.
Yeah, it's just been given 2 life sentences.
That sounds awful, this. I wonder if he didn't confess to it. Why? Because he thought, I'm pretty close to a care home. Yeah. I go to prison and it's a lot cheaper. Because they're not going to give him, they're not going to keep him in a high security prison. I can guarantee you that. As a white
he's in a wheelchair. There's no risk at all.
He'll end up in an open prison relatively quickly, and he'll just get about his business and get up in the daytime. They won't be locking the doors. He might go out and work in the gardens, and fiddle around doing that. Probably what he was going to do with his life outside here, really. So you go, I think I'll confess. I can't afford a care home fee. No, I'm not.
Great.
It sounds awful. But sometimes
I love
remember,
the way we get to a serious conversation. We can finish on a light note. I think
Yeah,
that's
but
part of what the show's about.
prison officers,
It's
and probably many prison staff, just like nurses and doctors do, you have a very dark sense of humour.
Don't be
Because when you're
just.
living in a very dark world and serious things, you come out with these things because it lightens the load. Nurses, I imagine, and surgeons, when they've got people on that stretch, I bet you they have a great laugh down there when they put
They do when you're on the table.
No, they go, oh my, oh my.
It's a way of
Quick,
managing.
get the bow and arrow out. He's coming over the bridge.
Yeah, look out, yeah.
Okay, you're absolutely right. It is in the 60s. I'm not sure the exact number, but it is in the 60s of whole life sentences and or whole life orders, as I believe they're called.
Yeah. We tend to call them what they call them, full life tariffs or something. Whole life tariff.
And it's always interesting to me that you know what we call it on the outside, which is where I would sit, and what you guys call it on the inside, because it's always different. And I was always, I guess, surprised by the amount of acronyms and abbreviations that there are for everything in the prison service. Can be boom, 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 boom. I'm just like, this is just you're just sending me entire letters. That's it.
You can write a letter with letters. You can write a letter with letters.
Anyway, I know that this will come back up. I know McCreevy will come back up because I know down the line, it's scheduled for episode 8. We're going to talk about the death penalty. And funny enough, in episode 7, we're going to do manslaughter and murder with diminished responsibility, and then building into the death penalty, which I know will be a highly contentious and highly debated, discussed, and probably a highly tempered discussion, because I have my position where I think with some of these criminals, we'll bring some examples of that. But yeah, I think we'll try and pick up on some specifics of actual prison sentences at certain points and some actual individual cases, certainly as they come up in the media, because I think that's again what we're talking about doing with the show. I think we're there. We're at time. So as we said earlier, I'm just trying to find my pieces, my outros. That's it. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, fine.
I think we're done.
Good time, yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for listening. If you would like to subscribe, please do. Please share the show. Ask any questions you might have. If you want to ask them for Graham or for Emma, please do send them in. Any comments, suggestions, any particular topics you'd like us to pick up or discuss, we absolutely will do. So that's it for episode 4 of Life Behind Bars. We've been talking about prison sentences. Next week in episode 5, we're talking about criminal justice around the world. So we're going to pick up what happens in other countries and other systems and other processes and such like that. But until then, it's goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me.
Perfect. We're getting it.
Sound like the two Ronnies.
We're getting there. It's goodbye from me.
Goodbye.
Goodbye from me. We'll work on the outro. And that is it. So we will see you next time.
You've been listening to Life Behind Bars, produced and created by 50mm Media.